travelers, and welcome to another episode of the Versus Stars podcast, third season. How my loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. This is an amazing episode because John Paesano boards the mothership to discuss Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Now come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hi, Mr. Paesano. Thanks so much for coming to Versus Stars podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's totally my honor. Like I said, I absolutely love Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, so thank you so much for scoring a good movie.
Yeah, yeah, it was no easy task.
I bet it wasn't. So I always start off with a question of inspiration. So what inspired your love for music and who your earliest influences?
I mean, think I'm like 90% of composers out there I'm gonna say John Williams right off the bat. I thought I was the only one as a little kid who liked John Williams, but I guess like I soon got to LA and discovered that every single film composer in town, no matter what style they write music in, it seems like John Williams is always on the top of their list. Um, but it's true. I mean, he had such a giant influence on, especially my generation. And the funny thing is, it's not even composers. You find it even with directors, even with cinematographers. Like John Williams created something that just got people into the movie business. It wasn't just scoring; it was just movies in general. Because, I always say it this way: when I was a little kid, you could do two things. You could go to the movies, and the only other thing you really could do was buy the soundtrack. Those were like the two things you could do.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, when we were kids, you would, you're younger than I am, but when I was a kid, you would go to a movie and then, I don't know, that was the last time you could see the movie before VCRs or VHS tapes came out.
Yeah.
Or then it was like you had to wait like a year and a half before you could get that movie again to view it. So these soundtracks allowed you to kind of relive that movie. And so I saw a movie called Empire of the Sun when I was around 9 years old. Christian Bale's young kid, Steven Spielberg film. And that movie, like I saw that movie and I went out and got that soundtrack and I just had lived and lived and lived with that score. And it just made me fall in love with the process of, right, I could close my eyes and listen to that music and see the movie. And it allowed me to and I thought, wow, it's that's just such magic that, he was doing. And I wanted to learn how to perform that magic trick. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to get it as good as he did it, but here we are trying, 40 years later. So, yeah, that was John Williams was my first. And then, of course, once I figured out John, I started then immediately you go to Jerry Goldsmith, you go to John Barry, you go to, all the greats that kind of came up in that era. And then, to this day, I still listen to film composers. I'm more of a fan of this. I'll always be more of a fan than I am a composer. So whether it's Barry McCreary or whether it's Lauren Balfe or whether it's, I listen to film scores daily, whether they're my peers, whether they're younger guys coming up in the business, whether they're a little bit more senior than me, someone like Michael Giacchino. I mean, I still am a huge fan and consumer of film scores. So I just love the craft and just so happy and honored that I'm able to kind of play in the sandbox with it.
Now, something that you said is kind of interesting that I don't think I thought about before. You said, regardless of what style of composer you are. So what do you mean by that? And what style of composer are you?
Well, you see, I mean, it's interesting. Film composing has changed so much over the last 40 years. I mean, when John Williams and Jerry Goldsmith were writing scores, they had an orchestra. Like that was it. And I'm not saying that's all they had, but it was more organic. You know what I mean? It's not like in 1960 people were doing very electrical hybrid scores. I mean, I'm sure people were playing with different ideas and trying different techniques and using the orchestra different. But the one thing that really separated composers out from each other was A, their writing style, and B, their themes, their thematic content. And that's you were kind of playing in a much more kind of confined space from a sonic palette. And where we are today, the orchestra is just like an instrument in the score. You know what I mean? And so it's the cool thing about it is it's really the sandbox has grown and it's evolved sonically, and it's just not a place anymore for orchestral film composers. I mean, you have the range is just huge. Everything from experimental artists to electronic musicians to classically trained film composers to hybrids of it all. So it's a much larger playing field now than it was in 1968 when Jerry had done the original Planet of the Apes, since we're talking about that, or when John Williams was doing early television. And I mean, it's just the palette is just huge now to what composers have at their fingertips.
Now, the interesting about what you're doing with Kingdom Planet of the Apes is that you're dealing with a franchise that is 56 years old, maybe slightly older.
Yeah, 55, 56. Yeah.
Yeah. I think encompasses 9 films technically, and the Tim Burton one, which we're kind of sort of counting. I guess I don't know if we're quite counting. I don't know. Nothing against
Which is crazy because it's a great score. It's funny. Wes would always do that too. It's always kind of like this forgotten film, but like Danny Elfman's score for it is like really, it's really amazing when you kind of get into it. But yeah, no, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, and I will say though, there are a lot of good elements to the Planet of the Apes from Tim Burton, though there is also Mark Wahlberg. But there's a lot of important elements.
Yeah, it was a tough film because the technology kind of wasn't there yet for his vision. I feel like I don't know that for sure, but you could see it. Like you could see what he was trying to do. It was just so hard to kind of like pull off what he was going for at the time with the limited technology that they had at that point. You know what I mean? Like so, if you think about it in those terms, with the films that are so visually, we're so spoiled now with obviously with what Wes and Weta have done, and even to what Matt Reeves and Weta had. I mean, it's just amazing where this film has gone, and it's really interesting for composers, like starting from where Jerry went and then going from like all the iterations that they did in Rosa, and then like you get into Elfman, and then you get into Patrick Doyle, and then you get into Michael Giacchino, and now kind of where we are with the job has changed as these visuals have gone more and more and more real. You know what I mean? It's kind of it's so easy. Wes and I have found that it was so easy to really you want the one, I mean, especially for Wes. Wes really wanted this film, Kingdom, to feel very grounded. He wanted it to feel the effects are so real and the apes look so good and so real. The last thing he wanted to do was have the music just push the audience out and make them feel like they were just watching a movie. He really wanted to make sure that the audience felt the world, that they felt immersed in the world. Score has a very interesting way of making an audience member either feel like they're sitting there with Noah and Raka at the campfire, or making them feel like they are a viewer in a movie theater watching a scene. And Wes is really great with that. He's really conscious of how music operates in these scores. And he did an amazing job of really being much better than I would have done. I really wanted to overscore the hell out of it. You know what I mean? One of the things I love about the Matt Reeves films and the Michaels films is like Michael's score is like, it's like right there with the dialogue. You know what I mean? It's like, it is like, sometimes it's even a little bit more in front of the actors. You know what I mean? Like it's very, it's very score forward. He loved the language of Michael's stuff, but he really wanted to make sure that the world was really felt and that the film felt really, really grounded. So it was an interesting exercise of like how we've noticed that as these apes become more and more and more real looking, it's easy to overdo, and before you know it, you kind of lose that ability to have the audience feel like you just, at least with Wes's vision, he really wanted to make it feel like you were there in the world with them, and you didn't want the score to kind of push people out and force them to be an audience. So, but I think that has to do with what you were kind of saying all the way back to the beginning. Like the visual effects have definitely influences kind of how we are scoring these characters now.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting. The music itself was fantastic, and I mean that I actually love the music. There actually were points though, which was kind of interesting, where there was no music except for the birds were in the background were the music. The water falling was the music. So
Yeah.
So when did you decide when music needed to be there, and when did you decide that maybe nature itself was the music that needed to be in the background?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's an interesting question for people or an interesting answer for people. It's not always up to us, the composer, of where music should be and where it shouldn't. There's always a conversation that goes on. And it's Wes, it's me, it's the editors, sometimes it's an executive might want to chime in. It's a team effort to try to figure out how we want to shape these scores and how we want to, have the music. And listen, it also, it doesn't matter if it's John Paesano or if it's Jerry Goldsmith or Michael Giacchino, or we never are fully just like in charge of where we want this music to go. I mean, Planet of the Apes is a huge franchise that's owned by a huge, film studio. It's their property. It's not Wes's property. It's not my property. It's not Michael's property. It's 20th Century's property. You know what I mean? And so there's a lot of, teamwork that goes on in trying to figure out how we want to present these things. And of course, it always, like, Wes, at the end of the day, it's his final vision, and it's his. But we're all kind of working together to try to figure out how to shape these things. And Wes had a really specific vision on this film. He really, and that's Wes. Anytime I wrote music that felt like a movie, he'd always kind of joke around and say, like, it feels like a movie. It feels too much like a movie. Like that piece of music with that performance and that background, it feels way too much just like a straight ahead movie. What can we do to not make it feel so much like a movie? And whether it mean like losing the cue completely, Wes would always talk about he loves Spielberg so much because Spielberg there'd be like a giant action scene and John Williams would score right up to that moment. And then when the action started, he would just drop out. And you know what I mean? And like most composers would just like drill through that whole entire scene and make it, a big action bombastic thing. So we really tried to, Wes was really conscious about like his vision on how he wanted this. So there were many times where, the music editor, Ted Kaplan, myself and Wes would all kind of get in a room and like duke it out where we wanted music. And sometimes we'd win the fight. Sometimes we wouldn't. Sometimes I was right. Sometimes Wes was wrong. I'm just joking. Wes is never wrong. I'm always so yeah. So it's but that's what you want out of a director. You want to have that relationship where you feel so comfortable that he can go to you and say, like, no, John, this piece of music is way too cheesy. You got to like tone it down. And, you want to be able to you want to be comfortable enough with him to say, like, oh, no, man, you're completely wrong. You're sucking all the life out of this. Let me score this moment. You know what I mean? And it's awesome when you have that relationship with a director because that's filmmaking. I mean, filmmaking is a full team effort. And sometimes the bigger the project is, the more members are involved. And Planet of the Apes is a huge project, with a lot of people have, interests that they want to kind of explore and see. And Wes did an amazing job of like making sure everybody was heard, but keeping us on task of like his overall vision. So,
well, I mean, it's an incredible thing that you had to deal with because not only are you dealing with the first movie in the new trilogy, it's a sequel to three other movies.
yeah.
But technically, it's also tied into sort of five other movies from the 60s and 70s, like from the old the old school Planet of the Apes film.
Yeah.
When you think about themes and callbacks, how do you recognize the other films? Did you want to be influenced by them? Did you want this to be something completely separate? Because it is technically the beginning of a new franchise, but once again, it's deeply put into a whole lot of other films.
Yeah, I think because Wes and I are such film score geeks when it comes to like appreciating and loving film music, I don't think there was ever a point where we thought we weren't going to use Jerry. I think we talked very, very early on that we both thought it would be criminal not to honor kind of what started this whole entire thing. Everything from, I mean, I think, and it's for me, it was Jerry. For Wes, it was, it was visually the film. I mean, it was music. It was just the whole magic together of that 1968 film. So I knew right away that I was going to be playing in that sandbox, that Jerry kind of that world that he developed, that language he developed for the original Planet of the Apes score. Everything from the instrumentation to his actual language that he developed for the film, and he developed a tone row, which is basically a musical scale for that film, and he wrote it in a style called serialism. And I knew that I wanted to kind of incorporate a lot of that DNA that was part of that film. At the same time, we also knew that we were coming over from this huge successful franchise that started obviously with Rise, and then ended up with Matt and Michael's amazing work in Dawn and War. And we knew we had this like very, very dedicated fan base. And so it was tough. I mean, we had to kind of, listen, doing Maze Runners was great because I could just kind of write what I wanted to write, and I wasn't going to be, you didn't have to like bring over all this kind of, you didn't have to do all this fan service and there was never anything developed for it. So you kind of have like a blank. With this film, it was tough because, listen, you're not just bringing over like random themes either. You're bringing over like history. You know what I mean? Like the Jerry Goldsmith score is just like an Academy Award winning, amazing groundbreaking. I mean, when Jerry wrote that score in 1968, he like broke the mold of what you could do for film scores. I mean, something like that had like never been done before. And it really kind of shook, the film scoring world kind of into a new era. And so we knew we were dealing with that. And then what Michael and Matt had done kind of brought it into the 21st century. You know what I mean? Like Michael developed like Caesar, Andy Serkis, Matt Reeves, Michael. They just like took this franchise and just like brought it back to life. You know what I mean? Because it went through a period of time where it really kind of was. I think like I remember hearing like Rick and Amanda, the writers, and Josh Friedman talking about like at least Rick and Amanda on the original the reboot trilogy with Caesar, like they had to like convince Fox to like bring this movie back to life. You know what I mean? Bring this franchise back to life. And then so it really kind of was on life support, I think, at one point. And so then you kind of had this reboot of it with Patrick Doyle doing the original Rise score, and then Michael. And you really I wanted to honor that as well, too, because we were kind of part of that canon. Even though we aren't necessarily a part 4, we are part of that canon. And Wes wanted to kind of bring that along as well, too, because there was just a really kind of intense fan base that needed to be brought kind of into the world as well. So my job, it was really important to me to kind of bring the Jerry side of it, just because that was my own, my vision and Wes's vision, to really kind of want to honor that and bring that along. But then we also wanted to bring Michael's world along too, because he had developed, and it was more so, Rise was kind of this origin story, whereas we were kind of more built off of these last to the Dawn and War. You know what I mean? Like as Caesar developed kind of into this leader. So I really thank God I didn't have to include. I wasn't so intent on including what Patrick had done too, because he had done amazing stuff, and it would just have been, my head would have exploded. So I kind of wanted to bring along this Michael side of it as well. So it was kind of a dance, you know what I mean? To try to, and then we needed to take it. Like Kingdom is not War, and it's not Dawn, and it's not Rise. It's a very, very different film. It's a completely centered around a completely different character. It's in a completely different world. I mean, we are now in an ape universe. We aren't apes living in a human world. We are purely in an ape world at this point. So we think. So it was tricky to try to like honor what had come before, but then at the same time like take us into a new direction.
When you're thinking about the sound for the film, again, on the one hand, it's on Earth, which is, we all know. But on the other hand, it's not really an Earth that's recognizable. It's not humans who are the main character, or who are running the Earth. It's the apes. But at the same time, it is very large scale, very natural. You're very much within nature as well. So you're thinking about the sound of the film. Which aspects did you want to draw from the most?
Well, I think the big part of it, the film is so visual. And whenever we would talk about music, it would, Wes is such a visual effects. He's got such an amazing eye for visual effects. And Wes reminds me of like a Mozart, like who could close his eyes and hear a symphony. You know what I mean? When we were on this film, I would watch sequences and I'd be like, I can't even write to this right now because it's not even worth writing to. Visually, you couldn't rely on working on the film visually, because none of it was going to be finished until it was too late. You know what I mean? In the process. But Wes could see it all. Wes could see everything that he knew this film was going to turn out to be, because he's just got that mind for like knowing. He knows like 20 steps ahead of everybody else where this thing's going to be, including the executives, including sometimes the visual effects people. I feel like, what I mean? He's got such a great eye for that stuff. And we would have to rely on him. I'd have to rely on him and trust him that what I was doing, there was cues I wrote where I was just like, oh man, I don't know this. I remember trying to I would write to sequences, and I would obviously be trying to fill in. I would write such elaborate things. I was trying to fill in what visually I couldn't see yet. So it'd be like a basic scene with Noah climbing along something or whatnot. And I'd write this like really, fantastical cue that was really thick and had a lot of, movement in it. And Wes would say like, no, 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 like trust me, this is going to be like this, and the vine, and Noah's going to be a monkey, and he's going to have his friends, and the sound's going to be like doing this. He's like, all you're going to need is just like a little thing going on here, and I'd be like, what? Like, you just want me to write like, one like little line for this thing? And I would look at this and I would just put it to picture. And I'd be like, oh man, this isn't gonna work. Like, we need more. Like, well, you know what I mean? And but like Wes knew, he like saw it. Like the climb, the opening sequence. I had written this like big elaborate opening to the movie when Noah and his two compadres are climbing and they're looking for the egg on top nest. And I'd written this like big opening, and Wes just knew from like, because that was like a huge visual effect shot. It was like one of the last shots to be done on the film. And we had like written this kind of like very simple thing. And and it was one of the first cues I had done. And I think I harassed Wes for the whole entire process of like wanting to let me write something bigger. Like, please, like, it's the opening. Let's make it big. And he just like knew from day one, like, nope, it's just going to be this like simple thing. And you're just going to have to live with it and like chill out, you're a spaz. Like, it's going to be fine. Cause I'm like, so neurotic in this process, like, wanting to do all this stuff. But you got to give him credit. He really had an eye on like what to do. So, but to answer your original question, that being said, when it came down to like instruments and visually trying to write this film, the one thing I did know visually, I had a lot of production art to work with. My conversations with Wes, kind of like I just told you, he had this idea of this reclaimed earth. And we really wanted the instruments to kind of have that feel to them. And when I say that feel, we wanted it all to be organic. We knew from day one we weren't going to have any hybrid elements in this score. And that meant no synth pads. That meant, nothing. Now, he let me stretch out a little bit. If I was able to treat things with some effects to kind of give them more of kind of like a paddy kind of ambient feel, but there was no talk of electronic instruments in the score at all. It was just off the table, and we both wanted that. The earth is so organic. Everything's been, and if we use the piano, we wanted it to feel like it was a piano that may not have been a pristine, beautiful, grand piano in an orchestral hall. Maybe it had been, I've used this analogy, sitting in a schoolhouse for 300 years and it's kind of gotten detuned, or maybe some of the percussion wasn't perfectly in pitch. And the orchestra, he didn't want too big of an orchestra, so it felt kind of like this giant wash of sound. He wanted to hear all the different instruments. He wanted to be able to hear the bow on the rosin on the bow along the strings of a cello or in the cello section. So he had a very, very kind of specific sound that he wanted. And it's funny, when you go back and listen to the old 68 Goldsmith score, it's got that quality to it. It's got this kind of gritty, textural, almost primal sound to it. And we really tried to adopt a lot of that as well during the recording process and the production process of the score.
So I think the piece we're talking about is called Discovery. And there's that one piano key that you're just happy, but kind of funny. It is so simple, but there's something. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. I feel like there's a lot involved in that one little sound of that piano, which is both it's a beautiful sound to it, but it's something almost ominous to it as well.
Yeah.
So like, what was your thought process about just this one?
So the Discovery theme, so the track one that you might be referring to, that was the initial suite that I had written. Wes and I had gotten together. And it's funny, we wrote this score because of kind of what I was talking about with the visual effects. We almost had to adopt the writing process of how it was written in 1960. I mean, we didn't have the visual, so we didn't have the visual, we didn't have the visuals to write to like you normally would on like a modern film score, because it was all kind of being worked on at the same time we were working on this. And so we kind of got into this idea of like doing a lot of suites and talking about the score from a very thematic concept versus just writing to what we're seeing on screen, And so in a cool way, it's funny, in a weird way, we have this very complex and technical process with the film, getting it all done with the visual effects. But the writing process was very antiquated. I mean, we wrote this score like Jerry probably would have wrote in 1968. He didn't have all the visual, stuff that you would have, normally in modern scores where we have digital video and we can throw things into timelines and set up markers and do all this stuff. So we did a lot of suites, and that track, the Discovery track, which is the track 1 on the CD, that was our first suite that we wrote for the film. And it was all based off of Noah and May, and then discovering that there's this greater world out there, and can humans and apes live together? And it also comes from this idea of kind of what Michael had done in the earlier scores. There's a simplicity to the scores for Dawn and War that I find works so well with these characters, and I really wanted to kind of adopt that and bring it along. And the simplicity of that simple piano melody was something that I really kind of wanted to bring along. And Michael had done it with his initial cue, and I thought it would be kind of a fun thing to do for the fan base to say, hey, listen, like, we haven't forgotten about that language. It's still here. It's different melodically, but it's still part of the world. We're honoring kind of what's come before us with it. But it truly is. I think there's a simplicity with Noah, an innocence with Noah's character, and even with May's character, that we really wanted to honor. And I felt like the piano just did such a great job of capturing that kind of innocence. And as you see, we start off with this very, very simple piano melody, but as the cue grows, it's just kind of just growing on those chords, as it goes, and it's kind of becoming more and more elaborate. As Noah and May kind of find out throughout the film, there's a much more kind of complex issue that we're dealing with. And you're right, it's neither, and this is kind of part of the language of the film. It's neither positive nor negative. There's still hope in it, but like you said, there is almost like an inherent struggle that's kind of going on with it as well. So that was the initial. I want to say that was kind of one of the first things I sent to Wes, where he goes, yes, this is like, it's feeling like there's our own language in here, but it also is paying tribute to kind of this franchise that came before us. And then the Jerry stuff we kind of use for a different part of the film, which is more designed kind of around that 1968 film, which is Jerry. I always call, once Noah leaves the village and goes to the valley beyond, or the quote unquote forbidden zone, that to me turns into Jerry's world. So when we get into Human Hunt, when we get into the bridge, when we kind of get Jerry's language is kind of there, like kind of like almost like a leftover remnant of that 1968 film. And you can almost see it too with like the set design and some of the things we kind of pay tribute to. So I thought it would be kind of like a fun, like a fun and such a great place to introduce us kind of back into that 1968 film, but kind of with like a 21st century twist to it.
Well, like I said, so much of the music was so wonderful. Another piece I really enjoyed is I Am Rocka.
Yeah.
Because once again, Rocka's one of the best characters in the film.
Wes is going to love to hear that, by the way, because that was a piece that I had sent. I mean, Wes, but sorry, go on, finish your question, because I kind of jumped the gun a little bit.
No, but I think because Rocka's such a great character. I mean,
yeah,
he reminds me a little bit of I think with Maurice in the first trilogy.
Yeah.
And he's such a smart character, a funny character. Voiced by Peter Macon, who's another great actor, a friend of the show. So when you're thinking about composing a piece that is a Rocka or his piece of music, how are you using the music to define who he is, and what did you think? Which elements of him did you think were important to score?
Well, it's funny with Rocka. Like when the production artwork started coming in for Rocka, like Wes had shared a couple pieces of production art with me of like who this character was going to be and like what he looked like. Like it was so fun to look at Rocka because he was like this wise kind of, but to me he looked like he was like a hippie. You know what I mean? Like he had these like little braids in his hair, and he was kind of like living off in the, like this hermit kind of living. But he had this like wisdom to him. But like when you looked at him, you just wanted to kind of like hang out with this guy. You know what I mean? Like he reminded me of like someone you would see at like a Grateful Dead show. You know what I mean? Like he just had this like really cool vibe. He's a little stony, but he's just a really, really like cool. So we started like experimenting with some more kind of unique sounds that we didn't want to be too traditional with them. And we really wanted to try to give him kind of his own voice. So we started digging in to instruments that we normally don't necessarily write with. They are my like first go-tos. It's not like I went for a French horn or string section or whatever. So we found this contrabass clarinet. And Adam Hochstadter, who was an additional writer on the project and has been working with me for years and great multi-instrumentalist, we bought this instrument and it was this kind of old beat up contrabass clarinet. And Adam just started kind of like experimenting with it. And we found this really cool kind of note sequence that we found with it, but we wanted to kind of turn it on its head a little bit and make it feel like this clarinet had been the analogy I used earlier, left in a schoolhouse for 300 years, and we found it was all broken and out of tune, but still could kind of like bellow out this really cool tune. And we basically got the initial sound from that instrument, and then we kind of treated it a certain way, and it really turned into this like cool and threatening sound. But with the right treatment to it, it also could feel kind of really warm and inviting. And so when Noah first runs into Raka, when he falls through the ceiling and kind of ends up on the ground, and Raka, points his spear at him and says, who are you? You kind of get hit with that first initial sound, and that sound becomes really signature to kind of Raka. And it's very threatening at first. I remember when we first played it for the studio was like, I don't know, that sounds very like threatening, because we played it for them initially kind of like, oh, this is just, I think they heard it and it was kind of like, oh, this is going to be like Raka's suite. We didn't present it to them with picture. And they were like, I don't know, man, that feels like very threatening for Raka. But then when you started pairing it up with picture and you got the kind of support that it needed underneath it, I think it happens twice. So it happens once when he says, who are you? How young you are without your mask, I think is what he says to him. He's kind of pointing the spear. And it is very threatening. But then the next time you hear that sound is when he reaches his hand out and he says, I am Raka. And then Noah takes his hand and you get the noise strings come in with underneath that sound. And all of a sudden it feels warm and inviting. So it became this kind of sound that with the right treatment, it could either be very threatening or it could be really warm and inviting. So Wes really, really like fell in love with that sound, because it was a very different sound than your kind of very signature. And Wes is he's so sound specific with things sometimes. Sometimes just a simple sound to him can be very thematic. And me being kind of more of a traditionalist, I always wanted to kind of have like a motific idea for Raka. But he's like, no, that's all it needs. He just needs that sound. And it's just more about having the guts to, as a composer, to say like, just that sound, that's it. That's all you want for him. And sometimes that's the best thing, you know what I mean? Because that becomes thematic in its own right. So, he was a fun character to write to.
And I think another interesting about the character is, when you think about Raka, like I said, he has that caring soul. You think he's a little threatening, but there's also, at least in my opinion, there's a certain sadness to the character, because he is the last of the people who are holding on to the real Caesar, to the real lessons of Caesar.
Yeah.
So how does that incorporate into the music? And another thing I wanted to ask you as well, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to explain it well enough, but there's a piece of the music around a minute and a half into it that for the life of me, I couldn't figure out what it was.
What was it? Sorry, say again.
About a minute and a half into I Am Raka.
Yeah.
There's a sound. I can't even pick out what instrument is doing it, but I wonder if you could figure out which one it is. It's like a little moment in that second. See if I could figure out how to explain it. But if you can figure it out, please let me know. Because I was trying to figure out like how to. I was like, well, it's this instrument, it's that instrument. I was like, no, it's none I can think of at all.
Was it like a patty sound, or was it short? Oh, I know. Was it a like a little like yeah. Interesting. Yeah, that's a. So what we did is, for that sound. Well, first here, the first part of your question. Raka is a sad character. He's like living out in the wilderness. He's seeing this world that he knew of kind of like crumble around him. He's seeing people, this group of apes. Like that was such a big rule when at the end in War and Dawn, like ape doesn't hurt ape. You know what I mean? Like it was such a big part of that, and he's seeing this kind of like the teachings of Caesar being completely perverted and kind of, tarnished. And he's doing everything he can to kind of protect these teachings, but he's kind of like losing this battle. And I think when Noah comes along and they find each other, it's like probably the first time in a long time this guy is, this character has had any type of hope, So it was it is a we almost don't really need to score the sadness because it's almost understood from, the Matt and Michael had done such a good job of like putting so much importance on that thematic idea of ape not, hurting ape,
Hmm.
that the audience kind of comes so prepared, like understanding that. Wes still did a good job of basically making sure people that who hadn't seen the previous trilogy still could kind of pick up on it by doing a lot of exposition in that sequence. Um, but it's almost like we had to. It was almost fun just to score more this hope that Rocca had. As that
Hmm.
scene progresses and he starts taking Noah through the airport, and as they're kind of working themselves up the escalator until Noah sees the mural of the humans, you're you start to get this like little pickup of energy, a little like spark in Rocca's step as he's kind of going up the escalator, and he's getting, you can kind of see this excitement building in him teaching, telling Noah about what this world was, who Caesar was, and then when they get to the mural of the escalator and Noah sees, echoes and Rocca says, human, and they kind of have this, you know, commonality of like deciding who these people were, and Rocca again gets excited and gets to tell him how Caesar perceived these people. It was just really cool to kind of we could kind of really focus on the hope of like this kind of like budding hope that Rocca was kind of coming into at that moment, and and obviously we kind of get further along with his character as he gets to the bridge and all that. But yeah, he was a really fun character to score, very complex character to score. And he kind of leaves a little bit early in the process, but who knows what happened to Rocca.
Well, like I said, in my opinion, he's not dead. So that's what I'm saying. What's the rule in the movie? If you don't see the body, they're not
Yeah,
dead.
right.
That's what I'm
Totally.
saying. And he shouldn't be dead because he's too cool of a character.
Yeah.
I know I kept you a little bit long. Can I ask you a couple more questions if you don't
Yeah,
mind?
yeah. You're fine.
Okay. So another piece I really loved was Marauders in the Mist. Okay.
Yeah.
Which is I think it was very interesting, not only because it kind of to me it felt a little otherworldly as well,
Yeah.
and it kind of feels like an aspect of the ape society that we're seeing for the first time in this film that we don't see in the others because they haven't got to the part where they're the aggressors.
Yeah.
So when you're so how did you approach Marauders in the Mist, and how can you give it like that otherworldly kind of feel to it?
Yeah. So Marauders in the Mist is kind of the first. That's when Caesar, or that sorry, that's when Noah first stumbles onto the Marauders. And the Marauders are an interesting character because one of the things I did before I really kind of got into writing for the film is I did a lot of research on. I just wanted to kind of see if there was any relation with music and primates, and what the relationship was with music. Was there a relationship with music? And I stumbled upon a study that Emory University had done with music and primates. And it was really fascinating. There was a study done at Emory University where they would play music in like an enclosure where primates were. And they found that whenever they played like standard Western music that was done in like 2/4 or 4/4 time, what we're kind of used to, perceived as Western music in the musical world, they hated it. They would get as far away from the sound source as possible. They would go to another spot of the enclosure. But anytime you played music that was non-Western, more kind of world music, whether it be, Indian music or African music or music that's not traditionally in like a 4/4 time signature, we in the music world we call it like a compound time signature, 11/8, 5/4, just kind of odd time signatures that aren't traditional to Western music. They loved it. They like gravitated towards it. So I was like, oh, this is like what an amazing idea. Like what we'll do is for the Marauders, I wanted to write the music that was in a compound time signature to kind of be their kind of thematic throughput. So I kind of adopted Jerry's palette, but instead of just writing it in kind of like a 4/4 time signature, we did it in an 11/8 time signature for the Marauders based off of that study, and it was fun. So for like, whether it was Marauders in the Mist or whether it was like Human Hunt, like Human Hunt's a great example because we adopted a lot of Jerry's. The first 30 seconds of Human Hunt is more or less Jerry's world, right? And Jerry's melodic content and his famous piano motif that kind of runs throughout that piece. But after the 30 seconds, we kind of jump into this 11/8 feel for the Marauders. So we're still using Jerry's language, but we're using it in this, we're basically structuring the music more in this 11A field that I kind of stumbled upon from this study. And hopefully this is not too in the weeds for you. But it was just a kind of a cool way to kind of still kind of have the spirit of Jerry with us, but at the same time kind of bring something new to the table. And we did that also as well for Marauders in the Mist as well. Jerry also in Planet of the Apes, and not just Planet of the Apes, in Alien and Patton, he really utilized it's called, back then it was called an echoplex. These days we call it more of a tape delay. He was really experimental by using this effect, but normally when people would use it on electric guitars and more modern instruments, Jerry would use it on the orchestra. And you hear a lot of it in Apes, and you hear a lot of it in Alien, and you hear it in, the most famous one to me is the Patton trumpet. It does like this kind of like repetitive delay thing that happens. And in Marauders in the Mist, I'm using it on kind of this flute motif that happens throughout that cue. And when you say otherworldly, you might be hearing that, because it does. It's kind of like, sounds like an old sci-fi space age kind of type of sound. So we utilized that effect, and that was kind of adopted from Jerry's world as well. So yeah, he was just so groundbreaking, and just had so much courage to really try a lot of this different stuff at a time when, that stuff was just very avant-garde for the time. Today, if you use a delay, it's just normal business. But back in 1968, to do that in an orchestral setting was like, geez, this is really, really avant-garde. So it's just, I really, really appreciate kind of the courage he must have had to, and also too, like, I can't imagine like how he talked the studio into like going for something like that. Just kind of knowing how the inner studios kind of like how the inners kind of work in those situations. So yeah, it was really kind of an amazing and a fascinating kind of thing to witness, and not to witness, but to kind of play over in my head and see how he went through that process.
I mean, there are so many great pieces. Another piece I really loved as well was Noah's Purpose. I thought it was a beautiful piece, and I kind of was thinking about it was, when you think about Noah's purpose, you really got to kind of dive into not only who Noah is, but who Noah may be in a future as of yet made film. When you think about the score and you're really focusing on Noah, are you thinking about who he is now, who he will become, or where he's been, or where he's come from?
Yeah, so Noah's Purpose, it's funny because the name Noah's Purpose kind of leads you to think that that's Noah's theme. But it's not. It's actually Eagle Clan's theme. So when Noah is sitting there, it's both actually. So because the cue kind of encompasses two parts. The first part of it is him at his dad's grave, and he's sitting there having this inner monologue with his dad and talking to his father, and basically saying that he will find the people that did this, and he will kind of avenge, but what we're hinting at there is Eagle Clan. It's all about Eagle Clan. His dad was master of birds. He was an elder. And Noah kind of takes it upon himself that he's going to set off on this journey and find, who did this. And he's going to bring his clan back to, their home. And you really kind of feel this. It's almost like a goodbye. It's a ending and a beginning kind of wrapped into one. The first part of the cue is like an ending. And then the second half of the cue, now we're getting Noah, and we're going from Eagle Clan theme into like kind of our first statement of Noah's theme. And as he kind of gets on his horse and rides away from his home, and then he sits at the tunnel, and he's looking at that tunnel, and he knows that he needs to go to the valley beyond to take on this, new adventure that he's taking on. And then we kind of see the growth of Noah's theme that's kind of like our first full statement of Noah's theme as he bursts through the tunnel and heads to the valley beyond and starts this adventure. And it's kind of like this growth of Noah kind of going from this, young ape into, so innocent, only knowing this world, and to now discovering that, it's a scary journey for him. It's the first time he's kind of leaving the borders of his village and going on this great adventure to kind of find his clan and bring them back home. So Noah's Purpose kind of encompasses both. It's got Eagle Clan, the Eagle Clan theme, which is stated in the beginning when he's sitting at his dad's grave, and then it goes into Noah's theme. Eagle Clan theme is obviously written, the first time we hear that is in the cue Eagle Clan, which is the first time when Noah rides into the village, and you kind of get this first witness of Eagle Clan. and then we also use it at the very, very end in Ape Aquatics when he's leading the Eagle Clan to, climb, Eagle Clan, climb, and you get the kind of full statement in more of a heroic sense on that cue as well. So yeah, those two themes are kind of always with us when Noah. But it's funny with Noah, it's like, do you play Noah's theme or you do Eagle Clan? And they're kind of almost the same importance because at the end of the day, Noah kind of becomes the new leader of the Eagle Clan.
Now, another thing that's interesting about Noah and Noah's purpose and everything else is that while you're writing Noah's theme, there's a question in the film, and I think it kind of answers it, but I guess technically it doesn't. That Noah is technically a descendant of Caesar. You kind of get it from the blue eyes. That's like Caesar's son of blue eyes. When you're thinking about the score, how the music can potentially give away an answer to that question if they connect it too closely to Caesar and what his music in War of the Planet of the Apes and John Planet of the Apes and obviously Rise of the Planet of the Apes. When you're thinking about being Noah's score, how closely were you thinking about what was done before for Caesar?
The hardest thing that was the tricky, well, not the hardest thing, but the tricky thing with all these characters was, and it's interesting. I never really got the chance to personally ask Michael about this on this film. The one thing that I kind of found out with these characters, and I don't know if this shaped kind of Michael's score as well, if you got too fancy with them, if you got too notey or too complex with the music trying to express these characters, it felt goofy. It almost turned into like a Jungle Book or something. You know what I mean? Like it got too, and we were so conscious of wanting them to feel grounded, and we felt like simplicity really, really allowed these characters to kind of feel grounded, and you weren't. It would be so easy to turn them to make it too saccharine or to kind of make them feel too goofy if you just overscored them. And it was funny because when they were humans, this kind of goes back to what I was originally talking about. When they were humans, you could throw a lot more at them, and it was more accepted. But then when they turned into apes, all of a sudden it was like, whoa, that's like way too much. Like it just got goofy. So he kept simplifying and simplifying and simplifying. And Michael's score, God, the Caesar theme, it's so simple, but it's so powerful. You know what I mean? And I always wondered as I was going through this process, because I kind of ran into the same thing. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't like, oh, he's simple, we're going to be simple. And a matter of fact, I kind of wanted to go away from it because Michael's was so simple that if you tried to do simple, you just sounded like Michael. You know what I mean? Like it was like, it's not like you had like a lot of wiggle room to kind of do your own simple. It was like so simple. It was this simple piano motif that he kind of used. And it was almost like a lullaby. It just had this kind of it was very, very emotional. Caesar's character was way more kind of emo, you know what I mean? Like it had this, and so was Matt's film. It had this kind of like emotional undercurrent that was happening with it. Wes's film's more adventurous. You know what I mean? It has this more kind of road movie feel. It's more about this kind of young ape. It had a little bit more of a youthful vibe to it. He was an optimist. He had this like kind of optimism to him, and then you throw in Raka. We just had a very different tone to this film. So that's super emotional. By the way, I love the super emotional thing. It was like a gut punch. You know what I mean? Like, I almost felt bad for the audience in a sense because you couldn't do that with this movie because it was a very, very different world. As Noah progresses and the story goes on, maybe we get there. But this initial movie was much more of like an adventure movie. That being said, we still kind of ended up in like similar places, even though I was going for more adventure and Michael was kind of maybe going for more of an emotional like a kind of a, I don't know what the right term is for it. He was going for it, and I don't know this for sure, like I said, because I hadn't talked to him, but it definitely seemed like they were very tuned into the emotional side of the character, where Wes and I were really tuned into more of this adventure saga happening. So we had kind of more of an epic feel to it. But even though we were going for completely different things, the simplicity was the one thing that we still kind of adopted from it. So I think it's just inherent, these characters, when you write for them, the more real they look, the kind of more simplicity started kind of playing a bigger part in how we shaped the music for them.
And I think another interesting about the film is that I wasn't too soon into the close to the release of the film, where I think it was Disney announced that their plans are making, I think it was like five more of these films. I mean, there's
Yeah,
definitely sequels coming. This is a franchise. It's gonna happen. And it's Disney, so they're not gonna let a
yeah.
franchise die. So you know this is gonna happen. As the composer, was there discussions on what the sequels would be like and what your part in it would be and what the sound could be in the future?
No, I mean, I know Wes hasn't shared any ideas with me about like kind of where the story is going. I know that he has, he's always talking with Rick and Amanda, and I'm sure Josh, about kind of different ideas and where to take the story. Knowing Wes is probably 10 movies ahead of, way before this movie even came out. So I'm sure he's got a whole idea kind of wrapped up in his head. But him and I hadn't talked about it. And we were so busy. I mean, we literally like worked all the way up to the release. You know what I mean? I was worried I was going to go to the premiere and I was going to get a bunch of notes. But the way I always have more notes about the score than Wes has notes for me, which is kind of funny. But yeah, I mean, we never really got to a place where we were like talking about, future. I mean, he literally was working all the way up until the release. But I do know for sure that they have that knowing Wes, he has a pretty good grip on where he wants to take this thing. I mean, the tough thing for Wes now is just time too. You know what I mean? He's going to be a busy guy, and he's already done a trilogy, and I think he knows how much time it takes to kind of move these along. And I know Wes has a lot of ideas and different things he wants to do. So cross my fingers, and I hope that he's back on the next two because he's just perfect for the gig.
Hmm. So what is next for you?
Next for me right now is unfortunately I can't talk about too much of it because I'm under NDA. But I am working on another film and I am working on another video game project as well.
Very
And then
good.
I also do a great show for Amazon called Invincible, which is an animated show, which is a
Love it.
lot of fun as well.
I do love Invincible. It is a great show.
Yeah, yeah. And then I'm going to be doing another Spider-Man game probably in the future. So, so yeah, no, there's just things on the horizon for sure.
So, Mr. Paesano, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. You've been absolutely fantastic. And like I said, Kingdom Planet of the Apes, beautiful film, beautiful score. And I'm a huge Planet of the Apes fan from the last trilogy. So thank you so much
Yeah.
for making this one as a worthy successor to the ones that came before. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Versus Stars podcast. Please help me battle the algorithms by liking and subscribing. Be sure to return for the next episode when Ethan Sachs boards the mothership to discuss Star Wars Jango Fett from Marvel Comics. Till next voyage, travel on.